Okay, so we're diving into the world of geisha. And let me tell you, get ready to have your mind blown.
It's a fascinating world, that's for sure.
We're talking about centuries of tradition, art, history in Japan, and it goes so much deeper than what you see on the surface.
Way beyond the silk robes and the cherry blossoms, that's for sure.
Right. Like, I did a ton of research for this one, and wow, I was not prepared.
I bet. It's amazing how much there is to learn about this world.
But luckily, expert speaker is here with us to break it all down.
I'll do my best.
They're basically like fluent in geisha history, and more importantly, they can actually explain it all in a way that makes sense.
Well, that's the goal, at least.
So yeah, get ready, because we're about to uncover the real story of the geisha, and you definitely don't want to miss this.
It's going to be a journey.
Now, I gotta start with this. Did you know that geisha were originally men?
It's true. It's one of those things that surprises people when they first learn about geisha.
Yeah, so to understand how we got to the geisha we think of today, we have to rewind all the way back to 18th century Japan.
Right, because their role has transformed so much over time.
It's crazy how much it's changed, right?
Absolutely. It's a complete evolution from, being these entertainers in pleasure quarters to, becoming these refined artists that we picture today.
Right. I mean, that's a huge jump to make. Like, imagine going from singing in a tavern to, being a full-blown cultural icon.
Totally. And it's not just about entertainment either. They became fashion trendsetters, trusted confidants to some really powerful people.
Oh, yeah, they had some serious connections.
And get this, they even became, in a way, symbols of resistance against westernization.
Whoa, I did not know that. That's super interesting.
It's a side of them that a lot of people don't realize.
Okay, so we've got to talk about the skills, because when you picture a geisha, you immediately think about how incredibly talented they are.
Well, absolutely. The skills they have are mind-blowing.
Like, nobody just pops out of the womb playing the shamisen like a boss.
Definitely not. It's years and years of intense training. That's what's so fascinating about it, right? We're not talking about, a casual hobby here.
For sure, it's a serious commitment.
You've got traditional dance, music. They even master the art of conversation. And pouring tea, even. They do it with this insane precision. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's like everything they do is elevated to an art form.
Exactly.
Okay, so I read that this whole training thing, it all goes down in specific districts, or I think they were called Hanamachi.
Yes. The Hanamachi are super important to the whole geisha world. They're like these designated districts within the city.
So like their own little world.
Yeah. Each Hanamachi has its own history, traditions, even social rankings within the geisha community. Think of it as the central hub where aspiring geisha learn absolutely everything. The artistic skills, social graces, you name it.
So it's pretty intense then. And it starts pretty young too, right?
Yeah, we're talking even before they get fitted for those elaborate kimonos and the white makeup.
Right. Before all that.
They're sent to live in an okiya.
Okay, hold up. Okiya.
Yeah, and while they're there, they're called shikomi.
Okay, now you're just using fancy words to confuse me. Break it down. What's shikomi? What's an okiya?
Okay, so okiya first. It's basically a house that's run by a retired geisha, kind of like a house mother or a mentor figure. And the shikomi are like the newbies.
The newbies. God.
And they live and breathe the geisha life 24/7 in the okiya. It's a super immersive apprenticeship.
Okay, so it's like geisha boot camp, basically.
Yeah.
But what are they actually, learning during this shikomi phase?
Oh, it's
more intense than just geisha chores, right?
Oh yeah, way more than chores.
Okay, good.
It's like they're like sponges,
Yeah.
soaking up everything about the geisha world. They help out around the okiya, they attend to the senior geisha, and they observe everything.
Really bad.
How they interact with guests, the subtle things, It's all about learning by watching, by doing, even by the silences, like learning a secret language.
Ooh, I like that.
But instead of words, it's etiquette and tradition.
Right.
You can't just read this stuff in a book.
Exactly.
And it's not all passive observing either.
Right.
They're also starting their formal training dance, music, tea ceremony, all those geisha skills.
So they're really building those foundational skills at that point.
Exactly.
So at some point they go from shikomi, like we talked about, to actually being a maiko.
Right.
Which is the apprentice geisha.
Oh, bingo. And here's where it gets really visually stunning, I think.
Right.
That maiko phase, that's when they start wearing those vibrant, colorful kimonos, the white makeup, the elaborate hairstyles with all the ornaments. It's captivating.
We have to talk about the white face paint.
The oshiroi.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, it's iconic.
So what's the deal with that?
Well, fun fact, did you know it used to be made with lead?
Get out. No way.
Yeah, thankfully they use much safer ingredients now.
Good.
But the effect is still really striking.
Oh, for sure.
It creates this, like, almost mask-like appearance
Right.
that immediately sets them apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not just the face, either.
Right.
You're right, you mentioned the hairstyle.
Yeah, like I was reading that even how they tie their obi sash, it changes as they get more senior.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Every single detail, from the length of their kimono sleeves to the type of hair ornaments they wear, it all means something.
Wow.
It tells a story about their experience, their rank within the Hanamachi. It's like this whole secret code.
That's so cool. Okay, so our aspiring geisha has gone through the Shikomi thing. Now she's a Maiko. She's got the look down.
Right.
What happens next? Like, how does she actually become a full-fledged geisha?
Well, that's where the one-san comes in.
What's that now?
The one-san.
Okay.
Which means older sister. Now, this might not be a literal sister,
Okay.
but it's a more experienced geisha who takes the Maiko under her wing.
Got it. So like a mentor in the geisha world.
Exactly. The one-san, she's the one who guides her, introduces her to, like, important clients,
Oh, I bet.
helps her navigate those, like, really intricate social circles of the Hanamachi. It's a super important relationship for a Maiko to have.
That makes a lot of sense.
Like having that experienced guide.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of those old school apprenticeships, like,
Okay.
learning a trade from a master.
Totally.
And so eventually, after years of this training and mentorship, they have like a graduation ceremony.
They do. It's a really big deal. It's called an erike, which basically translates to turning of the collar.
Turning of the collar, got
It
it.
marks their official transition from apprentice Maiko to geisha.
So what actually happens during this erike?
Well, there are special rituals, the specific kimonos they wear for the occasion.
Oh, bet.
But it's really this public acknowledgement, within the Hanamachi
All right.
that they are now ready to entertain guests on their own, not just as apprentices anymore.
Wow, I bet that's an emotional day.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All those years of hard work finally paying off.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that even after the erike, their learning never truly stops.
No, of course.
It's a lifelong pursuit, like any true art form.
Right, constantly refining those skills. But, there's one thing we haven't really touched on yet, and it's kind of like the question when most people think about geisha.
You mean the connection people make between geisha and prostitution?
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that's honestly so often misunderstood, especially here in the West. So how did that happen? Like, how did this whole geisha prostitution thing get so messed up?
Honestly, it's a long and complicated history. Like way back, the lines between geisha and, say, courtesans, who were prostitutes, those lines were blurry.
Right.
And you have to remember, some geisha districts, yeah, they did have a history of prostitution,
Yeah.
especially in the early days. And then, like, before Japan finally passed that prostitution prevention law in 1956, well, it was a different time.
Okay, that makes sense. But then there's that whole geisha girl thing that popped up after World War II.
Ugh, don't even get me started.
That really threw a wrench in everything, didn't it?
Absolutely. Talk about a cultural misunderstanding that, like, just
Yeah.
wouldn't quit.
Seriously.
Okay, so during the Allied occupation, you had, sadly, some women who were working as prostitutes, and they started calling themselves geisha girls.
Oh, that's so exploitative.
It's awful.
Yeah.
But they figured, it would appeal to the American soldiers who, let's face it, didn't know any better.
That's just heartbreaking, though. Taking this incredibly rich artistic tradition and twisting it,
It's a shame.
And the worst part is how that whole geisha girl thing, it became like this catch-all phrase for any Japanese woman. Like if someone wanted to just reduce them to a stereotype.
Exactly. Totally dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And it takes away from, like, the true essence of what geisha actually represent, the artistry, the dedication, the centuries of cultural significance,
100%. Speaking of, though, their role has really evolved over time, hasn't it? Even beyond, like, separating themselves from that whole prostitution misconception.
Oh, for sure. Think about it. Back in the 19th century, they were practically fashion icons. They were even, in some ways, pushing back against rigid social norms.
Yeah.
But now it's more like they're guardians of tradition,
Keepers of the flame.
Yeah. Like, they're keeping these ancient arts alive in a world that, let's face it, is changing crazy fast.
That's what blows my mind, though. Like, they're still around. With everything we have now, all the tech, all the modern entertainment, you still have these women dedicating their lives to something so traditional. Makes you wonder, though, What does the future hold for geisha?
Right. Are they going to fade away? Or can they, like, adapt? Big
It's
questions.
huge. And I don't think there are easy answers.
Definitely not. I mean, yeah, their numbers have shrunk. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But there are still young women out there, and they're still drawn to this world.
Totally.
The art, the discipline, that sense of sisterhood you find in the Hanamachi, that's powerful stuff.
That's what gets me. Like, it's clearly more than just a job for them.
Right. It's a whole way of life.
Yeah. You know what? I think we need to do a whole other deep dive on just that, like the future of the geisha.
I'm in. Let's do it.
But for everyone listening, we've talked about the history, the art, the misconceptions, all of it. But now it's your turn. What do you think? Is this world of the geisha ultimately about holding on to the past? Or do you think there's a way for this tradition to not just survive, but like thrive in the 21st century? Something to think about. All right. So you're looking for more than just kind of the headlines about trade wars, right?
Right.
You want the real story behind the World Trade Organization,
Yeah.
the inside scoop on how it shapes our world.
Right.
Well, buckle up because we're about to take a deep dive into the WTO,
Okay.
going way beyond the surface to understand what it is, how it really works, and why you should care.
And trust me, it's a lot more interesting than just tariffs and trade disputes.
Right.
The WTO is often portrayed as this sort of like bureaucratic monster.
Yeah.
But it's really a story about global cooperation, albeit on a massive and often complex scale.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We hear WTO and we think globalization, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just a product of globalization, is it?
You got it. The WTO is deeply intertwined with how globalization actually works.
Okay.
Think of it this way. It didn't just bring up alongside globalization.
Yeah.
It actively shapes how globalization plays out, influencing everything from the price of your coffee to the types of cars on the road.
It's like the WTO is writing the rules of the game while the game is being played.
Exactly. And those rules have really consequences,
Yeah.
both positive and negative. But to fully grasp its impact, we need to rewind a bit.
Okay.
The WTO was officially formed in 1995, but its roots go back even further to the aftermath of World War II with the creation of GANTE, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade.
So GANTE was like the prequel to the WTO. What was the driving force behind that transition?
Yeah.
Were there limitations with GANTE?
Absolutely. See, after World War II, there was this overwhelming sense that we needed to prevent another devastating global conflict.
Right.
And many believed that fostering international trade and cooperation was key to achieving that goal. GANTE was a step in that direction, focusing primarily on reducing those straightforward tariffs, the taxes on imported goods. But as the world became more interconnected, GANTE started to show its age. It lacked the structure and enforcement mechanisms to deal with the complexities of a rapidly globalizing world.
So it was time for a sequel. From GATT to the WTO, out with the old rule book and in with the new.
It wasn't a complete overhaul, more like a major upgrade.
Okay.
The WTO built upon the foundation laid by GATT, but introduced more comprehensive rules, covering a wider range of trade-related issues. And crucially, it established a dispute settlement mechanism,
Okay.
providing a way for countries to resolve trade conflicts peacefully and within a rule-based system.
Sort of like a global trade court.
Precisely. And this was a game changer. It meant that countries couldn't just throw up trade barriers or engage in discriminatory practices without consequences. The WTO provided a framework for accountability and helped level the playing field, at least to some extent.
Now, you mentioned the WTO covers a wider range of issues than just tariffs. Can you give us a sense of what those agreements actually deal with? What's in this massive rule book?
Well, imagine a massive library with stacks and stacks of agreements.
Right.
That's essentially what the WTO oversees. You've got agreements on everything from agriculture and textiles to intellectual property rights and trade-in services. It even delves into issues like food safety standards and environmental regulations.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
So it's not just about how much a country can charge for its exports. It gets into the nitty-gritty of how goods are produced, right?
Exactly. Take those seemingly harmless technical standards and regulations, for instance.
Okay.
On the surface, they might seem like a way to ensure quality or protect consumers,
Right.
but they can also be used strategically as non-tariff barriers to give domestic industries an advantage or even block imports entirely.
Okay, so that's where things get really interesting. and complicated. Can you give us an example of how that might play out in the real world?
Sure. Let's say a country wants to limit the import of certain fruits.
Okay.
Instead of slapping on a hefty tariff, which would be pretty obvious,
Right.
they might impose really stringent pesticide residue limits, making it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for foreign producers to comply.
So it's like a hidden trade barrier disguised as a safety regulation.
Exactly. And that's where the WTO's emphasis on transparency comes in. One of its key principles is that countries have to be open about their trade policies, making it harder to hide these sorts of sneaky tactics.
It's like playing chess, but instead of knights and bishops, you've got shipping containers and trade agreements.
Exactly. And just like in chess,
Right.
every move has consequences.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the impact of the WTO. Does it actually live up to its goals of promoting free trade and economic growth?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get bogged down in the technicalities, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's about real-world outcomes.
Right. And the reality is there's no black and white answer.
Okay.
The WTO has definitely had a significant impact on the global economy,
Okay.
but it's a mixed bag.
Right.
On the one hand, studies have shown that it has facilitated a substantial increase in global trade,
Okay.
which has contributed to economic growth in many parts of the world.
More goods flowing between countries, more competition, lower prices for consumers. Sounds like a win-win, right?
In theory, yes.
Right.
But the criticism often levied against the WTO is that these benefits aren't always distributed evenly.
Okay.
While some countries have thrived under the WTO system,
Yeah.
others, particularly developing nations, have struggled to keep pace.
So it's not as simple as saying free trade is good for everyone.
Precisely. The situation is far more nuanced.
Okay.
Take, for instance, the issue of agricultural subsidies.
Okay.
Developed countries often provide substantial financial support to their farmers,
Right.
which can distort markets and make it difficult for farmers in developing countries to compete.
Yeah.
The WTO has attempted to address this issue, but it remains a major sticking point in global trade negotiations.
So that's an example of where those good intentions of free trade maybe don't translate into a level playing field in reality.
You got it. And this is where the criticisms of the WTO come into play.
Oh.
Detractors argue that it often favors the interests of wealthier nations and multinational corporations at the expense of developing countries and workers' rights.
Can you give us a concrete example of how that might play out?
Sure. Think about a country that specializes in producing a certain raw material, like cotton.
Okay.
Under WTO rules, they might face pressure to open up their markets to cheaper, subsidized cotton from developed countries.
Right.
This can undercut domestic producers, leading to job losses and economic hardship.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got the potential for growth,
Right.
but on the other hand, there's a real risk of exacerbating existing inequalities.
Exactly. And that's why the debate surrounding the WTO is so complex and often heated. It forces us to grapple with these fundamental questions about the balance between free trade, national interests, and global equity.
It's a lot to unpack. So let's shift gears for a moment and talk about how a country actually becomes a member of this global trade club. Is there an application process? Do they have to pass a trade policy exam or something?
It's more like a marathon than a sprint, that's for sure.
Okay.
Becoming a WTO member is a lengthy and rigorous process.
Yeah.
It involves negotiating trade terms with existing members, demonstrating a commitment to free trade principles, and aligning domestic laws and regulations with WTO agreements.
So it's not just about saying, hey, we want in on this free trade action.
Right.
It's about proving you're ready to play by the rules.
Exactly. And even once a country becomes a member, the scrutiny doesn't stop there.
Right.
The WTO has mechanisms in place to monitor compliance with agreements and address any disputes that might arise.
It's like joining a highly exclusive club with a very strict dress code.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have countries like Iran,
Right.
which have observer status.
Okay.
They get a front row seat to WTO proceedings, but aren't bound by its rules.
So they're like the window shoppers of international trade,
Yeah.
seeing what's on offer, but not quite ready to commit. What's their strategy?
Well, there are various reasons why a country might choose to be an observer.
Okay.
They might be testing the waters, assessing whether the benefits of membership outweigh the costs, or they might have political or economic concerns that prevent them from fully embracing the WTO system.
Right.
It's a strategic decision based on their unique circumstances.
And speaking of unique circumstances, how does the European Union fit into all of this?
Yeah.
It's a member, right?
Right.
But then so are individual EU countries. It's like a trade-themed nesting doll.
That's a great analogy. You're right. The EU's relationship with the WTO is fascinating because it operates on multiple levels.
Okay.
The EU as a whole is a member, and it negotiates trade agreements on behalf of its member states.
Yeah.
But those individual countries also have a say in how those agreements are shaped and implemented. It's a complex balancing act between shared sovereignty and national interests.
So the WTO isn't just about economics, it's also a reflection of evolving political relationships and alliances.
Absolutely. And that's why understanding the WTO goes beyond just memorizing a bunch of rules.
Yeah.
It's about grasping the intricate web of economic and political forces that shape our globalized world.
It's like trying to solve a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
Where the pieces keep changing shape.
Yeah.
You've got economics, politics, history, all intertwined.
Yeah.
But, after this deep dive, I feel like I'm starting to see the bigger picture, the why behind all those WTO headlines.
That's the key, isn't it? Moving beyond the headlines to understand the complexities and nuances of the WTO.
Right.
It's not just about trade wars and tariffs.
Yeah.
It's about the very fabric of our interconnected world.
And the choices we make, both individually and collectively, about how we want that world to function.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important point about the WTO.
Okay.
It's not a static entity.
It's constantly evolving, adapting to new challenges and global dynamics.
So it's not like they wrote the rule book back in 1995
Right.
and called it a day.
Not at all. The WTO operates on a system of ongoing negotiations where member countries come together to address emerging trade issues and try to find common ground.
Like a never-ending trade summit.
You could say that.
Right.
And one of the most well-known examples of this ongoing negotiation process is the Doha Round,
Okay.
launched back in 2001.
Doha, like the capital of Qatar.
That's the one.
Okay.
The Doha Round was aimed at further liberalizing global trade, particularly in areas like agriculture, where developing countries often face significant barriers.
Yeah.
However, it's been stalled for years due to disagreements between developed and developing nations on key issues.
Sounds like those trade talks can get pretty heated.
They can.
Yeah.
What are some of the main sticking points?
Yeah, what are they?
Well, agricultural subsidies, as we touched upon earlier, are a major source of contention.
Developed countries are often reluctant to reduce these subsidies,
Yeah.
while developing countries argue that they create an uneven playing field.
Right.
Intellectual property rights are another thorny issue,
Okay.
with disagreements over how to balance protecting innovation with ensuring access to essential medicines and technologies.
So it's not just about economics. It's about navigating those ethical and social dimensions of global trade as well.
Absolutely, and that's what makes the WTO such a fascinating,
Yeah.
albeit challenging, institution.
Right.
It's a microcosm of the global community,
Right.
where diverse perspectives and interests collide.
And where finding solutions requires compromise, diplomacy, and a willingness to listen to different points of view.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So there you have it.
Yeah.
The WTO in a nutshell. Or maybe a very full nutshell.
Yeah.
Packed with complex rules, ongoing negotiations, and those big picture questions about globalization, fairness, and the kind of world we want to create.
It's a topic that deserves our attention,
It does.
even if it doesn't always make for the most exciting headlines.
Exactly. Because understanding the WTO is about so much more than just trade. It's about understanding the forces that shape our interconnected world. So the next time you hear about a trade dispute or a WTO ruling,
Right.
remember this deep dive, and I guarantee you'll see those headlines in a whole new light.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep asking those deep dive questions. All right, buckle up, everyone, because we are diving deep into the world of asteroids today.
Oh, this will be fun.
We've got a mountain of intel from Wikipedia's asteroid entry, and we are ready to dig in.
Love it.
So, big question. Should we be prepping for an asteroid apocalypse, or are these just harmless space rocks just, vibing out there?
You know, it's funny you should say that. Most people think asteroids are just kind of these boring chunks of space debris.
Right.
But it's way more interesting than that.
Yeah. I mean, even just reading this Wikipedia entry, the line between asteroids and comets is way blurrier than I thought. Like, who knew it was all about activity and not just what they're made of?
It's true. Like, you can think of it like like a sleeping cat versus one that's like bouncing off the walls.
Okay, I like that. I like that.
A comet way out in the cold depths of the solar system might look just like an asteroid because it's not shedding those icy layers, you know?
Yeah.
But get that same comet closer to the sun, feels that warmth, and boom, comet party.
Haha. Comet party. I love it. And just to make things even more interesting, it's not just planets and stars anymore. We've got dwarf planets now, too, just to keep things nice and complicated.
Yeah, it really shows you how much our understanding is constantly evolving. Like,
Right.
take Ceres, for example.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, she was just another asteroid, hanging out with her buddies.
Just a space rock, living her life.
Exactly. But then, bam, promotion to dwarf planet status.
Fancy. What happened?
Her own gravity was like, nope, I'm not just any rock, I'm round and proud of it.
Aha. So she got big enough to pull herself into shape.
Exactly.
That's so cool. And it makes you wonder what other celestial bodies might be due for a reclassification as we, get better telescopes and learn more.
Right.
Speaking of Ceres, her discovery story is a wild ride. It all starts with this. Get ready for it. A mathematical sequence called the Titius-Bode law.
Yeah.
And this law, this is like the hot new thing trying to predict where planets should be.
It seemed pretty legit at first, too. Like, it lined up with the planets we knew at the time.
Oh, really? So they thought they were really onto something.
Oh, yeah, totally. But then, as we do, we discovered more about our solar system and, well, didn't quite hold up.
The universe loves to keep us humble.
Always. But you know what? It did lead astronomers to search for a planet between Mars and Jupiter.
Okay, interesting. So they were looking in the right neighborhood, at least.
Right. And that's where our girl Ceres was hiding.
So we stumble upon Ceres, or at least the idea of Ceres, thanks to some slightly off math. I kind of love that.
I know, right? It's such a good story. So in 1801, astronomer Giuseppe Piazzi spots this faint object right where that missing planet should be, and he's thinking comet.
Okay, reasonable guess. It's faint, might be icy, seems legit.
Right. But then, and this is the best part, it disappears into the glare of the sun.
Oh, no. Are you kidding me? Talk about a game of cosmic hide and seek. We almost had you, Ceres.
I know, right? And just when they're about to give up hope, thinking it's gone forever, mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss steps in like the hero in a movie.
Oh, I love a good mathematical save. Tell me he figured it out.
Oh, he totally did. He developed this brilliant method to track its orbit.
Oh.
Helped astronomers find Ceres again. And this wasn't just about finding Ceres.
Right.
This was about opening the floodgates to discovering a whole new category of objects in our solar system. Asteroids.
Okay, so we go from thinking there's a missing planet to realizing, nope, there's a whole bunch of smaller stuff out there, and we're talking millions of these asteroids, right? Someone had the very fun and probably very difficult job of figuring out what to call them all. Did they just start numbering them, or what?
You'd think someone would just suggested Space Rock Steve and called it a day.
Right. Like, how cool would that be?
Right. But alas, no. They went with a system, although it did take a little while to figure it out. Early on, it was all like numbers and symbols.
Oh, man, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was confusing. Can you imagine at a stargazing party? No, not that cluster of stars. The one next to... Wait, is that a parenthesis?
Haha. Astronomical chaos. Okay, so thankfully they ditched that system. What do we have now?
So now, once they confirm an asteroid's orbit, it gets a number. Makes sense.
Practical.
But then it can also get a name, and this is where it gets fun. The discoverer often gets to choose it.
Oh, that's cool. So we've got asteroids named after, like, what?
Yeah.
Mythological figures, scientists?
Now, you name it.
Yeah.
Musicians, authors, you name it. It's actually really cool they found a way to blend science with this really human element. I love it.
I love that. It really drives home that even in the vastness of space, we find ways to connect. Now, we've mentioned Ceres hanging out between Mars and Jupiter. That's the asteroid belt, right? Like Asteroid, Grand Central Station.
Exactly.
So what's the story there? Why are most of the asteroids chilling in that one spot?
Well, we can thank our pal Jupiter for that.
Jupiter, always up to something.
Always. So instead of a nice, neat line of planets, Jupiter's immense gravity was like, nope, not on my watch.
So Jupiter was the ultimate party crasher, preventing a planet from forming and leaving us with, like, this belt of leftovers instead.
Exactly. A belt full of asteroids.
Yeah.
But don't think asteroids always play by the rules. They're cosmic travelers at heart.
Oh, tell me more.
Some asteroids called Trojans, these guys are really interesting. They actually share orbits with planets.
Well, get out of here. So they're, like, gracefully dodging a collision every time they orbit.
Exactly. like perfectly synchronized cosmic dancers.
That is wild.
It's because they hang out in these gravitationally stable
So
zones.
it's like a delicate gravitational dance. They're in the right spot to not get, like, sucked in by the planet's gravity.
Exactly. But then we also have the daredevils of the asteroid world, near-Earth asteroids.
Okay, those are the ones that like to live life on the edge, getting a little too close to Earth for comfort.
Exactly.
So should we be worried? Like, are we talking potential planet-killing asteroids here?
Well, before you start picturing any, apocalyptic scenarios, space is really, really big.
Right, lots of room to miss each other.
Exactly. The odds of a dangerous encounter are, like, astronomically low.
Okay, that's good to know.
But it is a good reminder to, think about what these cosmic wanderers actually look like.
Right. Like, are we talking the menacing, perfectly spherical orbs of destruction we see in movies?
Uh-huh. Not quite.
Because if most of them are just leftover bits and pieces from the early solar system, are they more like, gigantic misshapen potatoes hurtling through space?
That's a pretty good analogy.
I try.
Most asteroids are irregularly shaped, like giant tumbling potatoes in space. They're basically remnants of these ancient collisions, cosmic rubble piles from like way back in the day.
So much for those sleek, spaceship-dodging asteroids. I guess reality is a little less glamorous. But okay, so not smooth and spherical. Got it.
Yeah.
What about their size? Are we talking like potato-sized or giant Idaho potato size?
Oh, the range in size is incredible. You've got everything from, like you said, tiny pebbles to some that are as big as cities.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. On the larger end, you have Ceres, which she's a bit of an overachiever. She's about 600 miles wide.
600 miles. That's like driving across a whole state.
Exactly. And then there are asteroids the size of, like I said, cars, houses, and then some that are so small you can practically hold them in your hand.
That is an insane size range. Space never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah.
But you know what they say? Looks can be deceiving. What are these cosmic potatoes actually made of?
Okay, so to figure that out, we use something called spectral analysis.
Spectral analysis sounds intense.
It sounds way more complicated than it is.
Okay, good. Break it down for me.
Okay, so you know how a prism splits sunlight into a rainbow?
Yeah, classic school science experiment.
Right. Well, astronomers, we use a similar idea, but instead of a prism, we use the light reflected from asteroids.
So it's like a cosmic fingerprint revealing their composition? That's so cool.
It is really cool. And based on those fingerprints, we can tell what they're made of.
Okay, so we're talking like what? What's the recipe for an asteroid?
So we classify them into a few main types based on their ingredients. You've got your C-type asteroids. These guys are full of carbon.
Carbon, so like a giant lump of coal in space.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that makes them super dark, darker than a moonless night. Then you have your S-types. They're mostly silicate materials.
So more like rocky and bright.
Exactly. And last but not least, we have the M-types.
Hit me with it.
These are the metal heads of the asteroid belt, mostly iron and nickel. Imagine, like a giant flying chunk of metal just like cruising through space.
That's wild, like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
I know. It really makes you appreciate that these seemingly simple space rocks, they actually have this incredible diversity in their makeup. It's like our solar system has its own rock collection, each one with its own unique story to tell.
A cosmic rock collection. I love it. And some of those stories, those are pretty important, right? Like potentially holding clues to the origins of life itself.
Now you're talking.
Spill the tea. What makes you say that?
Remember those C-type asteroids, the ones full of carbon?
Yeah, the space coal.
So some of them, and 24 Themis is a good example, they also contain water ice.
Wait, so not just rocks and metal, but potentially like the ingredients for life?
Exactly. And if that wasn't cool enough, we've even found organic molecules on them.
Organic molecules. Okay, now my mind is officially blown. Are you saying that asteroids, these chunks of space debris, could be more like cosmic delivery systems?
It's a fascinating possibility, right? Imagine this. Billions of years ago, a bunch of asteroids loaded up with all this essential stuff, water, organic molecule, they crash land on a young Earth.
Yeah.
And bam, that's how our planet might have gotten the key ingredients for life to get started.
That's an amazing thought. It kind of makes you see those shooting stars in a whole new light. But how do we even study these things up close? They're so far away. It's not like we can just hop on a spaceship and grab a sample. Or can we? You're totally right. It's not like we can just order an asteroid sample on Space Amazon Prime.
Not yet, at least.
Right. But in all seriousness, how do we study them up close?
Well, we've gotten really good at sending out robotic explorers to do the work for us.
Makes sense. Less risky than sending humans, I guess.
Definitely. And it's pretty amazing what we've been able to achieve. Like, take the Near Shoemaker mission.
Okay. Yeah.
It didn't just, like, fly by asteroid eras. It actually landed on,
Wait, hold up. We landed on an asteroid.
back in 2001, yep, touchdown on an asteroid.
That's insane. I had no idea.
And then you've got Hayabusa, which brought back samples from asteroid Itokawa in 2010.
Whoa. So we actually have pieces of an asteroid here on Earth.
We do. Pretty cool, right?
That's beyond cool. It's like something straight out of science fiction.
I know. And every time we send out one of these missions, we get closer to unlocking more secrets about these amazing objects.
So what else is coming up in the world of asteroid exploration? Any other missions we should be getting hyped about?
Oh, absolutely. We've got some seriously cool missions happening right now.
Hit me with it.
Okay, so there's OSIRIS-REx, which actually grabbed a sample from asteroid Bennu back in 2020 and brought it back to Earth a few years later in 2023.
Wow. So scientists are probably like knee deep in those samples right now, trying to unlock all those secrets. What are we hoping to find?
Well, it could tell us a lot about how our solar system formed.
Right.
Maybe even give us more clues about the ingredients of life. We're just starting to scratch the surface.
That's incredible. What else? Give me another mission.
Okay, how about Lucy?
Lucy. Okay.
Launched in 2021, currently on like a 12-year journey to study Jupiter's Trojan asteroids.
Jupiter's Trojan asteroids. Okay. Refresh my memory. Those are the ones sharing an orbit with Jupiter.
Exactly. They're like time capsules from the early days of our solar system. Been hanging out with Jupiter for billions of years.
So they're going to have some stories to tell. Okay, what else is out there?
Okay, last one, but definitely not least, there's Psyche.
Psyche. Okay.
It's going to a really unique metal-rich asteroid. It's also called Psyche, actually.
Oh, cool. So, like, what kind of metal are we talking about here?
Mostly iron and nickel. Imagine a giant chunk of metal, just like out there in space.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
Yeah. Scientists think it could be the exposed core of a planet that got smashed apart a long time ago.
Like a giant metallic space scar.
That's incredible. And by studying this metal asteroid, we can learn about what's at the heart of our own planet, right?
Exactly.
Pretty cool, huh?
So cool. Okay, so we've been through a ton of fascinating asteroid info, but I gotta ask, should we be concerned about any of these asteroids coming a little too close for comfort? I mean, we've all seen the movies, right?
Yeah, no, Hollywood loves a good asteroid disaster movie. And while it's true that some asteroids do come close to Earth, those are the near-Earth objects, or NEOs, the vast majority of them pose absolutely zero threat.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
But just in case, we're not just like crossing our fingers and hoping for the best. Right?
Oh, absolutely not. There's a huge global effort to track and monitor those NEOs. And the really cool part is that we're developing some pretty ingenious deflection strategies.
Deflection strategies. Are we talking like blowing them up like in the movies?
I mean, that would be pretty epic, but probably not the best idea.
Yeah, probably messy.
A little bit. Remember the DART mission?
Oh, yeah. The one where we like slammed a spacecraft into an asteroid?
Exactly. It successfully bumped into that little asteroid moonlet called Dimorphos, and it actually changed its orbit.
It did. No way. So it actually worked.
It worked. We basically played a game of cosmic billiards and won.
That's incredible. So not only are we getting better at finding these asteroids, but now we're figuring out how to, like, nudge them out of the way if we need to.
Exactly. Pretty amazing, right?
So we've gone from being totally clueless about asteroids to, like, landing on them, grabbing samples, even figuring out how to move them. This whole deep dive has been a wild ride. I feel like we should rename this episode from Asteroids, Harmless Rocks, or Agents of Chaos to Asteroids. Way more interesting than we thought.
I like it. It really highlights just how much there is to learn about these celestial objects.
We started out thinking of asteroids as just these, like, space rocks leftovers from the solar system's greatest hits album, but there's so much more than that. They might have even played a part in bringing the ingredients for life to Earth. Plus, they come in all shapes and sizes, from tiny pebbles to objects hundreds of miles wide, and they're made of all sorts of materials. Some are like giant chunks of metal, others are like cosmic lumps of coal. And to top it all off, we're not just passively observing them anymore, we're landing on them, grabbing samples, and even figuring out how to move them out of harm's way if we need to.
And we're just getting started. Who knows what other secrets we'll unlock as we continue exploring these amazing objects?
That's the best part. There's still so much we don't know, and that's what makes it so exciting. So next time you look up at the night sky and see a shooting star, remember that little streak of light. That could be a tiny piece of an asteroid carrying with it billions of years of history, and maybe even a clue or two about how we got here. And hey, maybe someday you'll be the one out there making those groundbreaking discoveries.
Now that's thought.
It's all out there waiting to be explored. This has been an amazing deep dive into the world of asteroids. Until next time, keep looking up.